Yeah, so there you go. Professor Guy McPherson, who's controversial, using climate change, which is not controversial, has gone online as of yesterday, and there'll be links, lots of links, and said that industrial society will fall in September of 2018. Probably. June, July, August, September. So June and July and August, June's half over, so we've pretty much got 2.5 months before what he feels, looking at trends and projections and predictions based upon a whole bunch of different sources, that will be the end date. Now there's been multiple end dates given for the fall of human society, and it's a perennial thing, and it's great clickbait. So for that reason my title may be a little clickbaity, but it reflects the content. But I haven't used a picture of Guy or used his name because he is so controversial that he is by himself clickbait. And I don't want this to be a clickbait video, I want this to be a serious video. What I'm not doing in this video is going to explain the full dynamics of human-caused climate change, nor defend myself for what I feel is a high probability from science that humans are affecting the climate and that it is increasingly dramatic. If you want to go beyond this, as I'm going to link a whole bunch of talks in from Guy and a few other people who have degrees, who are not doing this as a hoax, but are saying that the ability of the human animal to use our opposing thumb to extract resources and not consider waste has created a heat engine that is causing feedback mechanisms that will destroy us all. Slide 1. So the 6 main feedback mechanisms we should be looking at: the vanishing Arctic ice, warming wetland peat, melting permafrost, Amazon die-off, clogging the ocean sink, and subsea floor methane hydrate. Now each of those independently affects the other 5. So right at the beginning of this, I want to point out that Guy McPherson doesn't know what he's talking about. None of us do. Nobody can accurately predict the future based on current and past knowledge. All we can do is project what we believe will occur, and that's what he's done, and that's why he believes that industrial society will collapse in September. Now that's bad news for most people, especially people like me planning my retirement. I won't do well for the stock market, but there's another caveat to that which I'll get into later on. So the problem with the Arctic ice is that people have been forecasting it to disappear during the summer for quite some time, and it hasn't as yet. However, it doesn't take much searching to see that the amount of sea ice has been decreasing year on year, and more importantly, the type of ice has been dramatically changing over the last 10 years. So that in of itself is an issue. Now most people don't really care about polar bears. I happen to care about polar bears. The problem with the Arctic ice melting and going away is not sea level rise. Ice, when it melts in water, does not rise sea levels. And that's what people tend to be focusing on here in terms of global climate change. What it probably will do in conjunction with Greenland is it probably will cause a severe stoppage, and it's already slowing down, the normal flow of hot and cold water in the North Atlantic. This will have the paradoxical ability to freeze the eastern seaboard in Europe. Now you can look into that. It's happened before and it will happen again. The question is it going to happen in the very near future? The rest of them I'll let you look at yourself and think about. The main reason I believe that Guy feels we're going to collapse industrial civilization in September, he hasn't really explained why. I think he believes the economy. I think he thinks trade war and ice cap melting and methane release and a few other things will cause a massive recession, which will lead to a specific type of event that will happen if we stop producing large quantities of sulfates into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is released by human activity about 80 times more than it's released by volcanic activity over the current period of time. That could easily change if you have a huge volcanic explosion. One of the problems with carbon dioxide is that it's needed to grow plants which are needed to produce oxygen. It's pretty much our only ability to get oxygen is from trees in the Amazon. We do get a substantial percentage from the oceans, which are acidifying and dying. And the Amazon is the tropical rainforest is the main source of human ability to breathe oxygen. As of yet, without the ability to breathe oxygen, we kind of die, right? Oxygen breathing is actually the first thing that you need to look at as a prepper, and it's often the thing we don't really look at, and then we kind of fudge that by looking at smoke. So carbon dioxide is rising. It is rising in correlation with human industrial activity. The planet is getting warmer. Now, what does it look like? I am in my 50s, I'm 54. I think most people over the age of 50, though not all, do see human-caused climate change occurring during their lifespan. I certainly have. I can read all the science and videos and watch videos I like and read books like this by him, but at the end of the day, these are confirmation bias to what I already have seen. I've seen a destruction of the environment. I've seen air become more and more polluted. When I was a child, I would walk the hills and dales of the English Lake District and slurp the water out of the streams, and it was beautiful. I believe you can no longer safely do that, and that is true in large parts of the world. So you can see various cities around the world on bad smog days. Now, not every day is a bad smog day, but most days these days are bad smog days. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, but you can smell gasoline in the air most places most of the time now. We have incredibly been able to produce a huge amount of economic power and wealth for a vast majority of the planet. The vast majority of people on the planet are doing really well compared to how they've been doing historically. The question is human-caused climate change real? The answer to that is yeah. I'm not quite sure why people believe that we cannot alter the climate. We can and we are. It's quite obvious from any correlational study. I'm not talking about research, I'm talking about looking at it yourself. The only reason you would say no is because of confirmation bias. You just don't want to see that you're responsible for killing the planet and your children, and maybe yourself. You also believe that it's a hoax and people trying to make money off this, but you don't see how much more money people are making from Exxon and oil. So I'm not quite sure why a few scientists scattered around the world are pretending there's climate change to get research grants for money. It's obvious for money, and sell a few books. But it's not obvious that the oil companies and the governments and the military that are dependent upon that have a hugely more important role in keeping oil extracted no matter the cost. Stick with me. I'm not going to explain it, but I will show it. Around about the 1960s, 70s, a couple of scientists in Israel found research that showed that the amount of radiant sunlight hitting the Earth was decreasing over time, and nobody believed them. Pure absolute nonsense. How could we affect the atmosphere of the planet to actually reduce the amount of sunlight coming down? We know this happens in volcanic winters and nuclear winters, but just because we're living our lives, we can't be doing this. However, it's now accepted that the amount of sulfates industrial civilization puts into the atmosphere, I'm not talking chemtrails here, guys. I'm talking about just regular, when you fire up your gasoline-powered lawnmower, when you drive your kid to school, when you turn on the tap and the water's use gasoline to get to the tap. All of those things affect the atmosphere. Now, global dimming is a good thing. Global dimming reduces the amount of available sunlight that actually is able to enter the Earth's atmosphere and hit the oceans where it's absorbed. The amount of water compared to the amount of land on the Earth, there's way more water, and water is a great heat sink. It just sucks it up. Now, currently they estimate about the power, the increased heat entering the Earth compared to the increased heat leaving the Earth is equivalent to about one Hiroshima atomic bomb every day. So it's a large amount of extra heat that we're producing, and that extra heat will heat up the oceans and will heat up the lands. Now the question of global dimming, and this is an interesting one because they did a scientific study on it. Planes were flying all over the world, blah 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 blah. Nothing much else shut down after 9/11, but air travel did for about 3 days. Pretty much there was no air travel globally. Quite a strange event if you think about it. During that time, the average temperature of the planet during the 3 days of the shutdown of air travel only, not industry. The industry was slowed down, people weren't driving as much, etc., etc. So there was another effect on reducing sulfites going into the atmosphere. But in 3 days, the global temperature rose by 1 degree centigrade. So I think a large part of what Guy McPherson's saying here is that he thinks there's going to be an economic war, economic recession by September, coupled with such a decrease in the Arctic ice flow, that there will be feedback mechanisms kicking in which will make the planet very hot in September, which will cause globally industrial society to stop producing, which will then trigger global dimming, which will cause 1 to 2 degrees heating within 6 weeks of the stoppage of human normal industrial activity, which will cause at that point the rest of the feedback mechanisms to kick in, and there will be no humans alive by 2026. Pretty gloomy forecast. I'll talk about the so what about this at the end. Now I'm not sure if his timelines are right. I do know you cannot predict the future with any degree of certainty. The future, historically predicted, has always shown difference. I do know the planet is incredibly complicated. So to say that 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, or I think in his case 100 different feedback mechanisms will work as predicted, will work as projected, is an interesting point of view. Hockey sticks. Whichever way you look at it, the planet's getting hotter. Now I know people keep babbling on online that we're in an ice age, that the temperature's stabilised, plateaued, dropped and all that stuff. That's absolutely not true. It's all based on cherry picking flawed data and ignoring the rest of the data to prove a point, looking at tiny little focal areas where this might be true. So that's again something I want to point out. With the temperature of the planet globally increasing, where I am it might be colder, especially if the North Atlantic conveyor belt stops. Where I live it might be vastly hotter than a 1 degree rise. For example, Australia, and I'll put a nice video in, a link of that as well, might be looking at 50 centigrade plus heat wave days, weeks. That's not going to be good news for Australia. But whichever way you look at it, we are producing more and more CO2 in the atmosphere. The planet is getting warmer and warmer by clearly well-known mechanisms. So like I said, I'm not going to construct this video to actually defend my position on human-caused climate change. It's the major reason I'm prepping. And I think prepping by its nature, whether it's true or not, is a good thing to do, because many things can go wrong in our lives and in the planet's life and in our nation's lives. So it's a good idea to prep. So I'm going to put some slides on now, and I'm going to explain what we're actually looking at. So the first slide is changes in Antarctic sea ice, because this is a perennial one right now. Yeah, the Arctic's going to disappear, methane's going to bubble out of the oceans and we're all going to die. But don't worry about that, because the Antarctic is getting thicker and deeper. Now that's actually true and not true. As in all things science, you can look at some things. The truth of it is that in some parts of the Antarctic, because the Antarctic is a continent, remember most of the ice in the Antarctic is on land, so if that melts, that will go into the sea and that will cause sea level rise, which is what the main people focus on. What Guy's focusing on isn't that. What Guy's focusing on is our ability to grow crops, our ability to function as a society, what will happen when our society collapses, and what that will do to the ability of the Amazon and the oceans to then actually continue to produce oxygen. What he's talking about is a lack of an ionosphere irradiating the planet, and we're all going to die, with or without a nuclear war. He also believes that all 400 or so nuclear power stations will melt down catastrophically. Now whether that's true or not is another matter. So yes, the Antarctic in parts is getting thicker and more ice, so that's good news, right? Well, a lot of water is in glaciers. So as you can see from this one, some glaciers around the world are actually getting bigger. That's how climate works. Weather is local, climate is global. But the majority of the planet's glaciers are disappearing. I've seen this myself in Banff. Horrific in only a few years, how these glaciers can disappear. That's not a big deal for us, for most people. But if you happen to live in the Himalayas, if you happen to live in Pakistan and northern India, the lack of glacier water, if that actually stops, would mean that you would die or move. That would possibly, easily trigger a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, which would trigger a nuclear winter, which perversely might be the only hope here. Get into that a bit later as well. However, the size of ice as measured by satellites, and the Antarctic and the Arctic are quite a distance from us, and most of the measurements done by satellite. The problem is that in the year where, I think I can't remember which year it was, that the Arctic ice sheets actually seemed to get bigger, when they actually went up there in boats, the actual amount of ice that was thick was tiny, much tinier than it should have been. And in fact, survey teams have been up there at certain points of the year and using icebreakers have not been able to actually find any ice stable enough to put people on to do measurements. That's how dramatically the ice is. So because the ice looks bigger from satellites doesn't mean it's actually there's more ice. Now these slides will show you that. I only go up to 2010, not because I'm cherry picking data, because that's the data that I have available. I don't really care if there was more ice last year than the previous 15 years. Things bump up and down. The overall trend here is for less and less amount of ice both in Greenland and in the Antarctic and of course in the Arctic itself. And the rate of drop is increasing, which is a key thing here. Now this slide here is Arctic and Antarctic sea ice. Now I want to talk about projections versus predictions. A projection is, last month I earned $10. The month before that I earned $9. The month before that I earned $8. The month before that I earned $7. So you would project this month's earnings to be $11 because historically I earn an extra dollar every month. A prediction would be that this month I will earn nothing because I will get taken out in a nuclear war between Canada and America. That's an obvious description of what a prediction versus projection is. The problem with projections is they experience change linear. We do know, and this is where the abrupt climate science movement comes in, that when temperature, when rainfall, when windfall patterns change, they tend to change abruptly. Now abrupt in geophysical terms means 100,000 years or more, right? Abrupt changing, what Guy McPherson's saying, he means inside of 3 weeks. A little different. Sea ice is stable in extent when measured in the Antarctic. Sea ice is dropping in the Arctic. Good news. No. The amount of sea ice that's coming off the land in the Antarctic is accelerating. There's more and more ice, faster and faster, going out onto the ice floes and then melting into the oceans. So the actual areas that have growing ice in the Antarctic are thinner and more friable. So that's not good news. It's melting faster, but ice before it melts moves. Works a lot like a liquid near liquid state. Now when we look at another thing here, this is where you might want to take exception to Guy McPherson's prediction that industrial civilization will end in September. Probably. That's his prediction. So when you look at this slide, you will see that in March and September, winter is opposite different ends of the round planet. Like if you think the planet is flat, you probably should stop watching this video. When you look at that, it's dropping marginally. Now the drop marginally is a huge volume, but that doesn't to me look to me that by 2018 there will be zero sea ice. This is in the depth of winter. Will there be no sea ice in the Arctic by September of 2018? Possibly. When I look at the correlational detail, I think no. I think it's coming, and I think it's coming in 2022. And I'm basing that on the contraction we're seeing. I'm basing it on projection. I'm basing it on linear. What Guy's basing it on is prediction. Trigger! Boom! That's what he's predicting it on. Now, as I said before, ice has to be thick. If it's thin, it tends to melt easier. So what you will see in this slide is the fact that ice in the Arctic is younger and younger and younger. More and more of it's melting every year. Not good news, for various other reasons as well, which I'm not going to go into. So this slide here will show you the amount of actual ice that's in Greenland and the Antarctic. And you can see we've got a major problem with Greenland. It's flowing out to the sea and melting much faster than we expected. That is definitely unpredicted. I'm not claiming Greenland will become green again in the near future, but it's predicting a large sea level rise. Now, one of the issues is that Greenland is called Greenland because it was green when the Vikings went there. Now, that was during a period of time where the weather was different from where it is now. The reason it's melting now is because globally temperatures are rising, which is kind of the difference. So there are various cooling periods, and I'm just going to finish this up by pointing out that the Maunder minimum, which is the cooling of the sun, happens about every 300 years, and on average global temperature drops by 0.6. So that helps us a bit, but overall the temperature year in, year out is still rising. So not great news. Do I believe that industrial society will fall this September? No. Emotionally, I'm not ready for it. I'm probably more ready for it than the vast majority of non-prepping type people. Cognitively, I'm not sure here. I'm really not sure. I think we are an adaptable species. I think the planet's a lot more adaptable than people like Guy and McPherson are giving it credit for. I think it's overly simplistic to say it works, it fails. There is an in-between here, and there is a changing here that can happen. So I remain optimistic that in the next 2 years I will finish work and I will retire to a large water area that's rural, because I think that's where my heart wants to be. I want to be in the trees and the lakes, but I also think it's a sensible thing to do. There is a definite sense, I think, in society that things cannot stay the way they are and that they will change, and not for the better. I think that's why in a large degree the prepper movement's altering. It used to be survivalist, invasion, fighting back, man against government, whereas now it's people trying to protect themselves and their children. And I think that's an admirable thing. So whether you agree or disagree with human-caused climate change is utterly irrelevant to this video. This video is putting forward something I found out yesterday, that there are scientists who is disrespected and respected in large amounts by different sides of the same argument, feels that industrial society globally will collapse this September 2018, in about 2.5 to 3 months. Given that, what are you going to do? Keep burping, I guess. What I'm going to do is what I've been doing all year. Since I first got involved with the abrupt climate change super doom theorists, I cognitively see where they're coming from. Emotionally, I'm not sure, and cognitively I think they may be wrong. I think they're right, but they could also may be wrong on timescales. I was hopeful that the planetary environment would collapse after 2050, so I'd be dead, so it wouldn't be my problem. Fairly selfish attitude, but I don't have kids, so there you go. What will you do if you start to see superstorms forming, if you start to see crop failures? I'm going to store up food. I'm going to store up water. I'm going to try and batten down the hatches. I'm considering. I've already switched most of my stocks to money market funds because, frankly, we're way overdue for an economic correction. We're way overdue for recession. And the longer we go between recessions, the worse the recession is. So I think we really should have had a recession in 2008 that was much deeper than the one we did have. And I do think we should have had a recession in 2012, 2013. I know if we don't have one this year, when we do have one, it's going to be dreadful. And the cessation of industrial output, if it stops, if air travel stops, if we stop producing stuff and burning stuff and using stuff and producing electricity, we'll have a lot of other problems to deal with due to that. But the effect of global dimming would happen within 6 weeks, he says. I'd say within a week or so, wherever you are, whatever time of year it is, on average you'll see your temperatures on average rise by 1 to 2 centigrade. It's already been a very challenging spring for most gardeners and most farmers in the northeast, and I believe the northwest and the southwest and the midwest of the United States are also having major problems producing food this year. We do know that without food, society will not function. We do know that without oil, society will not function. So yeah, batten down the hatches. Scan a few of these videos, they're kind of cool. It's an interesting thought process. Your own death is something that's hard to conceptualize. The death of me, you and everybody you know within a couple of years, 3 years from now, I would say is impossible for the human being to conceptualize. One of the paradoxical things Guy McPherson does is he states that we need to go personal excellence, be happy, face this inevitable extinction with decent character and pride. And I agree with him, but at the same time I think that character and pride says, no, I will survive. And I think that's a strong drive in the human being, and we will see. We will see in October whether his probable collapse of industrial society in September of this year comes true or not. It's going to be an interesting ride. There's lots of stuff in the climate change movement I don't think preppers really know about superstorms, dropping 10,000 ton boulders on Bermuda's shores, stuff like that. So, you know, Louis, I know you're prepping out there in Puerto Rico. Superstorms could be pretty bad if you live on an island, and we are, because of human-caused climate change, seeing more and more superstorms developing. So batten down the hatches, prepare for what you locally might see happen, try and think worst possible case and then think even worse. Get some barrier, get some cushion. Don't be like Fukushima. Don't build a seawall that's 5 meters tall, assuming there'll never be a tsunami more than 5 meters tall. The nuclear power plant closer to the epicenter, whose name I cannot remember, built a seawall 12 meters tall and had no flooding. We need to build our walls sanely and rationally, and we need to build them for worst case and then make it better than worst case. Alright, au revoir. I am off to the symphony on Wednesday. I've got 4 days off. I've got to mark some papers because eventually the strike I'm on may well end, and I'm going to enjoy the summer as much as I can. I'm not going to work too much. I'm going to go to the shower as much as I can, and I'm going to completely try and relax and enjoy myself, because I'm going to die. Maybe in September, maybe in October, maybe tomorrow, but I'm going to die. And the world's a beautiful place right now, and I really like being in the world and seeing the world. So I'm linking one video at the end of this, and please click on it, watch it in its entirety. It's a song, it's a cover of a Neil Young song by a Japanese band that I follow. The boys, it's a fun group, and they don't put out many videos. When they do, it's always a nice fun song, and it's usually a cover. So enjoy, live, love and laugh and life, because life is a fun thing to have experienced. Okay, toodaloo. I'll try and see how this goes where I edit this. Bye.